Today we're talking about genetics and how DNA plays a role within breast cancer. Hello, I'm Amy Dowden. I'm one of the professional dancers on Strictly Come Dancing. 2 years ago, I was unfortunately diagnosed with breast cancer. And after a mastectomy, chemotherapy, I'm very proud now to be on the other side and super grateful to be there. But now I'm on a mission to do all I possibly can to raise awareness, break the stigma, and to learn as much as I possibly can about this awful disease.
Hi, I'm Naren, one of the breast surgeons in Birmingham. I've been looking after individuals who've been touched by breast cancer for almost 2 decades, and it's a real privilege to be part of your journey and these collaborative efforts to try and improve awareness about breast cancer.
Welcome to Breast Cancer Uncovered.
We're delighted to be welcoming Professor Julian Barwell, who's a clinical geneticist and an honorary professor at Leicester. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right, I'm going to ask the most basic question. What is breast cancer?
So cancer is the loss of control of the way in which cells grow, divide, and mature and die. So it's not just a matter of cells dividing too fast, it's that balance between all of those factors. What happens is you get a point where the cells are no longer being controlled in the way they grow and they die, and they become too many cells, and the concern is, if left, they can spread to other parts of the body and cause problems.
Thank you so much. Now, please tell us all about genetics and the impact.
So your genes are the 20,000 messages that you get from your mum and dad. You get a complete set from mum and a complete set from your dad. So these are made up of 6 billion letters overall that you get. So you get 3 billion from each of your parents. And these are the instructions to help build and to help repair your body. They're also a little bit like a biological clock, because actually your oldest gene is 2 billion years old. So it's taken 2 billion years to get this far. And in fact, some of my jokes are almost that old as well.
I hope we get to hear some of them.
So you get these messages, and sometimes you can have a change in one of these genes, which can increase the risk of breast cancer. Now, there's 2 main types of breast cancer type of genes that you can inherit. One is the very high risk genes you might have heard of, like the BRCA1 and the BRCA2 genes. So Angelina Jolie had preventative breast surgery, and that tripled referrals locally, doubled them nationally. We wrote a paper called The Angelina Jolie Effect. I always hoped that she would change my life. It wasn't quite what I had in mind, but it helped me get my professorship when we wrote the paper explaining the impact of celebrity. So I'm so pleased that you've also come out to explain your journey. It really has a massive impact on the way people feel about coming forward if they develop any breast problems, but also talking about family as well. So huge thanks to you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about this.
No, thank you. And what have you learned about genetics and the role it plays within breast cancer?
So about 1 in 10 breast cancers has one of these very high risk genes associated with them. There are another about 1 in 10 where there might be some familial factors, but that might be due to hundreds of genetic types of small traits. A little bit like how tall you are depends on genes you inherit from mum and dad, hundreds of traits, but also whether how you sleep at night can have an impact, because that's when growth hormones are released, and also what you eat. So that's a common cause of breast cancer. But then there are this select few people, and you can tell those that are more likely if you're affected with breast cancer at a young age, if it's on both sides, if it's bilateral, if you have a family history, and in particular if there's ovarian cancer in the family as well. Also Jewish ancestry. There's some gene changes which are more common in that group. So these factors can give you an idea as to whether or not there's a gene. Now, you're too young to remember the 1980s, but I remember watching Ted Rogers in his Dusty Bin, and he had a catchphrase which was 3-2-1. And we used that to get an idea of family history. If you've got 3 relatives across 2 generations, like mother and daughter, 1 diagnosed under the age of 50, 3 relatives, 2 generations, 1 under 50. And if you've got even 2 of those 3, so if your mother and a daughter have been affected, 1 under 50, you should really think about going to see your doctor and ask to see the clinical genetics team and see if there's one of these high-risk genes running through the family. And that 3-2-1 scheme can work for any type of condition. So breast or ovarian, but it might be lung fibrosis or any other condition as well. Just a universal, quick and easy way of starting to think about family history.
So can I ask a question, Julian? We're often, we experience a lady coming to see us in the clinic, and she's been diagnosed with breast cancer, and the common feeling in her mind is that, what does this matter for my daughter? She also has a son. She also has a brother. Is there a myth that we need to demystify about breast cancer genes being passed on only to daughters or from their mothers? Is there a way that we need to demystify that?
This is such an important topic. The fact is that genes can pass through either side of the family. So we have a campaign called Genes Don't Care What You Wear, because it's really important to remember that if your father's mother or your father's sister has breast cancer, there could be a gene that could be passed on to you. So many times I've seen women present with breast cancer that spread who were told, oh, you don't need to worry about your grandmother's diagnosis or your aunt's. And the doctor had failed to remember that genetic risk can pass through either side of the family. Now, chaps, of course, not only can they develop breast cancer, and I know you talk about to examine your chest, and that's a really good campaign because it tells us that men can develop breast cancer as well. And it is more common in people with the BRCA2 gene. But obviously men can also develop prostate cancer, which can be linked to breast cancer susceptibility. Now, it can be difficult to screen for prostate cancer, but in men with these very high risk genes, it's certainly recommended. And there's a lot that can be done. So it's this message that genes can run through the male side is so important. You ask what sorts of women need to start to think about these genes. Well, any lady under the age of 40, any lady under the age of 60 who's got the breast cancer on both sides, which we call bilateral, any lady that's got breast and ovarian, or if they're under 45 and they've got a close relative also under the age of 45, or lots of relatives going back to the 3-2-1. There's also a particular type of breast cancer, which is hormonal negative breast cancer under the age of 60, that can run in families, be due to a change in a gene called BRCA1. So any woman under 40, bilateral triple negative under 60, or if there's that wider family history. So we must get away from purely just saying breast cancer. We need to treat disease for what it is, not what it looks like under a 600-year-old microscope. And that's part of personalizing treatment. We need to give people the right drug at the right time, at the right dose, first time, treat people for the disease for what it is, but also stop screening on age. We need to screen on level of risk. And that's where genetics comes in, because what we can do is we can answer why someone's got breast cancer, what does it mean for them and their treatment, so medical treatments or surgery. But also, I'm not here just to protect you, I'm here to protect your DNA, and that you're part of that 2 billion year old cycle. And so thinking about DNA, we're also thinking, what does it mean for your wider family as well, be it your twin sister or also for brothers and hopefully one day also children and grandchildren and the like. So we often ask these types of questions, and by understanding the causes, you can hopefully protect the individual, better treat them and protect their family.
I would love to know why I got breast cancer. And I guess that's something I always said, why me? Why now? And I did the genetics test and I didn't carry the BRCA gene, which I was so grateful for my twin sister, because that was a massive worry for me. But do you think I'll ever find out why?
Well, it's possible in time that you'll be able to have further genetic testing to either look for new genes or for these subtle genetic traits that have an impact on genetic risk. So we know that at least 1 in 10 people, particularly at a young age, it's probably a combination of some genetic factors and some environmental factors, and also a degree of bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
I always talk about the Swiss cheese model of risk that the airline industry use, which is there's no such thing as an accident. It's a series of minor little things that line up. And we think that cancer's caused when 6 or 7 processes are slightly altered. So what you're doing is that there are these repeat sequences throughout your DNA, and they're in other genes as well. So you can see if that goes wrong, it might have an impact in all sorts of other genes. So one problem leads to the other, leads to the other. And when you've got 6 or 7 of these processes all having a subtle change, it can potentially lead to cancer. So all breast cancer and all cancer is genetic, but it's not all inherited. Some of those changes occur over time. But we certainly know that in genetics, we don't just talk about genes. We talk about how your whole life interacts with the genes to have an impact on your level of risk. So it isn't just as simple as saying you're BRCA1 or BRCA2. We try and look holistically at all the factors which impact on risk, because I don't think cancer is ever that simple.
No. And I believe you got a rap.
Yes. So I wrote this book for children, and one of the ways of being able to interact with children, so this is sort of primary school age, is to make it a little bit more interactive as well. And obviously through music and dance is a way of doing that. So you feel free to take part if you know any of the answers. I know you've got particularly high A-level grades, so I'm expecting great things here, Amy.
Pressure.
So there were 2 scientists, Watson and Crick. They came from Cambridge, didn't want to miss a trick. And in 1953, they wrote just 2 pages explaining life on Earth across all the ages. Wilkins and Franklin found a DNA spiral. Soon their journal paper went totally viral. A strand spins up, the other goes down. A sugar-coated ladder twisted tightly around proteins that switch both off and on. Genes cross generations like father to son. With just 4 letters A, T, C and G, the code creates the whole of biology. Because explaining replication had always been the trouble, and the problem was solved when a helix was double. The 4 letters always pair off exactly the same, so DNA can copy itself again and again. Biology changed like in a 2-sided letter, like so many things in life, Amy. The simpler, the better.
Hey, that deserves a clap. That was brilliant. Well done.
It's a new way of trying to interact with children. And I remember reading a book about how what you eat becomes you as a child. And it plants a seed. And that's what we hope to do with the book, is to plant a seed in that next generation so that they can pick up the journey of DNA and understanding cancer and trying to use the science and the love and the understanding to try and help people pick these things up early, try and be able to understand the genetic causes and to prevent that cancer or to treat it more effectively and to keep that family together. But it all starts with getting the message out there, and it's a huge privilege to hear your story of strength and courage and kindness through it all has been truly inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And thank you for coming on and speaking with us today and helping me to understand, because, I'm a dancer, like if I said to you, do a whisk and a running promenade, you'd probably look at me and go, what you on about? And very often, with cancer and breast cancer, a lot of the terminology that I can read online or I hear just completely goes over my head. But obviously my world has now been surrounded by breast cancer. I want to help raise awareness, but also help educate myself as well and get the right information out there, because I think that's also so important. There's so much information out there, but what is correct and factually correct and useful?
Absolutely. And it needs to be individualized to that individual. We know that computer modeling, for instance, is now able to look at your family history. It's able to look at the results of any genetic testing. It's able to look at the pathological changes within your tumor and help try and work out what the risks might be of developing disease on the other breast or for the rest of the family, or whether or not there's any other familial factors that could be considered in the future. And this is improving all the time. It's really important that we're very sensitive in the way that we talk about these things, but also inspire people to realize there are things that we can do to help.
And on the subject of familial breast cancer, people with breast cancer in their family, we've been speaking to Jagdish Baines, who's had breast cancer herself twice and had members of her family who also had breast cancer. Massive gratitude for you to join us on this podcast. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners and viewers?
Yes, of course. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Jagdish Baines, and I am a 2 times breast cancer survivor. I also have been fine all my life, but unfortunately in my 50s, I got it. And I have a family history of breast cancer in the family with my mum 26 years ago, who we lost, and my sister who had it in the early 2000s, who is fine.
Really sorry to hear about your mother. I guess it's something you would have lived through, her diagnosis and subsequent treatment.
It was a 2-year period from diagnosis to her passing away. And unfortunately, they didn't have as much knowledge or research into breast cancer back then in how to help people to survive a lot better. So she was 58 when she was diagnosed, and I was 30 years old.
Okay. And so, I mean, although she was, I guess, in Canada, were you in the UK at that time? So
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. And when did you first start to think, actually, my mum had breast cancer, my elder sister's now had breast cancer, you know, is there a risk beyond the average population that I may be at risk?
So when I was about 38, going back to Canada for a visit, there is a centre there called the Tom Baker Cancer Centre. And I just briefly spoke to someone there about risks in genetics because there wasn't much knowledge out there. The nurse basically told me that there is a genetic test. It's very general. That's offered here in the UK. So I went for that, and it was found that I had a 50% risk of getting breast cancer. And I then joined something called the Family Clinic, where at the age of 40, I had mammograms every year.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit. When you were told about you have a 50% risk, did they say over your lifetime? Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And were you offered any gene testing or anything of that nature?
No.
So,
no.
Okay. And had your mother been offered gene testing?
No, because they didn't really have any knowledge of genetics as in depth as what it is now, I think.
Okay.
So no, she wasn't offered, and neither were we.
Okay, so in addition to, so you entered the family history program, and you were offered mammograms on an annual basis, so every year. Were any other options discussed with you?
No, none.
Okay, and how was your breast cancer diagnosed when you had it the first time?
I sort of knew in the back of my mind, after reading obviously a lot of studies and symptoms and et cetera, and I used to check myself. But I had a lot going on in my job at that time, so I thought, well, I'm going to get a mammogram soon anyway. I used to have them every December, so I thought, well, if anything's going to get picked up, it'll get picked up there. So I think I was a bit too nonchalant about it. And when I had my annual mammogram, that is when they picked it up.
Okay, so it sounds like it's what we call a screen-detected breast cancer. You didn't feel a lump, or you didn't have what's described as a symptom.
Yeah, I think there's different symptoms when you do know you have breast cancer. A is obviously losing weight quite quickly, having a lot of fatigue, and also pain. So I had all three, but I just think I found an excuse for each one.
Okay. And how did your knowledge of, your mother having had the problem and your sister having had the problem, how did it affect when you were understanding about your own diagnosis and considering your treatment options, what impact did that have?
I think asking a lot of questions with my medical team or to my medical team, that helped me to gain a lot of knowledge. And I think that impact was having that sense of control by knowing some information, because obviously they can't give you too much information at that time. I always knew it was there in the back of my mind. So I think I was a little bit more wary of checking myself, making sure, I had annual blood tests and the rest of it. But I don't think it impacted my life as such. I was still working, raising two kids, on that treadmill that everyone's on.
Mhm.
So I think I was too busy, basically, to even think about it.
And then you said you have two kids. When you initially had your breast cancer diagnosis, what impact did it have on your children, given your family history, I guess?
It was very devastating, obviously, for my children. My son was actually away at that time. He was doing an apprenticeship in Geneva. So I think telling him was the hardest. To watch your children just crumble and cry, knowing, their pillar of strength, their sort of foundation is being threatened is extremely difficult for, I think, children to bear and a mother to see her kids like that. It's just so unexplainable in words how much of an impact it has on your children. What it prompted me to do was, because of my family history, is speak to Guy's genetics, and sort of speak about my daughter, because I think I inherited a gene from my mom, which they didn't have knowledge of then, but they have knowledge of it now. When I had my cancer the second time, it was a second cancer. It was not a recurrence. It was different to the first one, but they didn't test whether I had a genetic abnormality or not. What I've learned throughout all this is you have to advocate for yourself. If you are concerned and you do think something isn't right, speak up. And I think, as like my kids, I didn't have my mum there. I had to be their pillar of strength throughout even my diagnosis, my treatment, everything. And it affects everybody, I think, not just the person who's going through it. And it's a lot to take on.
No, I can understand that. And again, I know this is a difficult conversation for you to have, so thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Early detection saves lives. And that's why I'm here, And I think educating people on symptoms, on, how to examine themselves and everything is extremely important. People hear the word cancer and automatically they think death, which is not the case. You can live a somewhat normal life with stage 4 cancer. Might be long, might be short. You don't know. Nobody knows. It's like every other average human being. You don't know how long you're going to be here. It could be any day. So I think the key is to not let it rule your life, and to gain some understanding and knowledge in your own head is a sense of control, because you lose all control when you have cancer, because you're going through treatments, you're having a number at the end of a phone, to ring if you do have a really serious query and you are in a really bad way that day. It's about having somebody in the middle between your medical team and yourself to be able to go to and, ask the questions and get that reassurance, because even though you do hear that information, you are still quite afraid, you lose sleep, all those kind of things as anyone else would over any worry that they have. It took a year for me to recover, to get back into the workforce as I was, having the kind of roles that I had before. But I tried every variation in the sense of working part-time, working closer commute, working locally, but I just couldn't do it. And unfortunately, I've had to give up work because physically I can't do it. I've worked since I was 15. So it took me quite a long time to accept that. It's things like that that I think people forget when you have any ailment or any illness, that person is actually trying to survive in this new flow of life, in this new way of doing things, or, just being a different person. And it's everyone around you as well that has to deal with that change, which is very difficult. I think there's an emotional impact, there's a physical impact, and there's a mental impact.
Thank you very much. It's been a humbling experience, and we can only thank you for your openness and clarity in terms of what you've described as a very your personal experience. So thank you so much for that. And there's clearly work for us to do on the healthcare side. So many thanks to you for your time and your insights. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
This is Breast Cancer Uncovered.
So clearly, Julian, we're making lots of progress in genetic testing, and I guess we can now do it rapidly. What do you think is the wider story in terms of if someone's got a new diagnosis of breast cancer? Should everyone get gene testing? Are there costs to be considered? Is access to gene testing variable throughout the country? Where do you see this space going?
At the moment, anybody where we think there's a 10% chance that we would find a gene change is offered a test. And that's universal throughout the country. There are studies starting to move towards population screening. Now, there are two main challenges with population screening. The first one is that's a lot of people to have their samples go through the labs. So there's a resource issue. And the second one is what we call the rule of 5%, which is 5% of people have got a subtle change in these genes, which can be difficult to interpret. So it is possible to find these small changes, and it's about 5% have got those changes in the BRCA genes, but only 5% of those are probably disease causing. So a positive test is often used to mean we found a significant gene change. And that now means we can work out what the risk of developing a new tumour, as well as the risk of ovarian cancer and the risk to the family. And it can help target treatment, what I call the Death Star analogy from Star Wars. You can't destroy the Death Star until you've got the plans. So if you can understand the weakness and what's driving the breast tumour, you've got a better chance of actually being able to work out what to do. The negative test you're talking about is when you don't find a gene change at all. Now, that doesn't mean for sure that there's no inherited factors. Remember, I said 1 in 10 could be these marbles in a jar, these subtle changes which have an impact on risk. But it does mean that we don't have a test for the relatives, which is what's happened here. The third one, the variants of sort of unknown significance, is the bullet hole theory. So these are the 400 subtle changes in our genome which we all have. So it is possible that we find something very subtle which is difficult to interpret. And that's more of an issue, particularly in people from ethnic minorities as well. But sometimes we go, we're just not quite sure. And that can be very difficult to explain to individuals and for them to truly understand. But what we hope is to be able to give a clear result. Yes, we found a gene, or no, we haven't. But remember, just because you don't find a gene doesn't mean the relative shouldn't be offered some screening.
Thank you so much, Julian. I love the rap as well. I think that's going to stay with me forever. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time today for doing Breast Cancer Uncovered.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll just leave with one final thought. When people are diagnosed with breast cancer or have a scare, they're often left with what I call that 3 a.m. in the morning feeling, what I call a 3 a.m. courage, which is everyone else is asleep and you're left with your thoughts. And it's when you truly find yourself when you have these types of situations. So it's really important that people know how to reach out for support. So we work very closely with the National Hereditary Breast Cancer Helpline, but there are other groups as well. So it's really important that people feel they can talk to someone, not just look out for information because there's a lot online, but also be able to have that shared lived experience as well. So speak to your doctor, your breast care nurse, your genetic counsellor, your clinical geneticist, or to the peer patient champions as well. But thank you so much for the opportunity.